Hi guys, I know I haven't posted in a little while. I do apologize, but I'm back today with a 1936 um, movie, Rembrandt. Um, so yeah, here we go. Um, Rembrandt is the story of, it's kind of a biopic about Rembrandt's life. It's more I was gonna say the back half of his life. His later life is what I mean. So originally, Rembrandt was married to a woman called Saskia, who was kind of the love of his life. And he was devastated when she died. And the point of her death is kind of the start of this film. So he was quite respected as a painter, and this film takes in him sort of taking to drink and living a scandalous life. And I guess it's like the downhill trajectory of his life. But um, I know it's quite interesting. I feel like his character is kind of when I think of films that are like a downward trajectory, I think of something like Scarface, and this isn't really like that. It's much more of a warm kind of film than that. Directed by Alexander Korda, my bizarre accent kicking in there. Never know which way it's going to go. He was a Hungarian refugee who went to England in the 30s. He received a knighthood. He was one of the, like a, it's rare for somebody who was a film producer to kind of do that. I think he was kind of controversial. He was quite influential in the British film arena, kind of pushing things in that country. If the name sounds familiar to you, he directed, what am I thinking of? He directed The Third Man. No, sorry, produced The Third Man. And yeah, Henry VIII movie that also had Charles Laughton is often like paired with this. He worked on quite a lot of things. Like people in this era were quite prolific, and he was active in his home country, country of origin as well, Hungary. So, yeah. So the film itself, it stars Charles Laughton as Rembrandt and Elsa Lanchester as the as Rembrandt's kind of second wife. What is her name? She has a really hard to pronounce name. I'm not going to attempt it. So in real life, Charles Laughton and Elsa Lanchester were a couple. They appear in a few films together, including one that was, I think, the last one that came out on my channel, Witness for the Prosecution. They're both in that one as well. Elsa Lanchester, to me, Bride of Frankenstein is like her most iconic, to me, like what I always think of when I think of her. So yeah, the film itself is black and white because it is 1936. The costuming is very much signaling 17th century, but the eyebrows are very 1930s. They're just penciled lines. Charles Laughton, I think, is really actually quite good as Rembrandt. He kind of has this like cheeky little face. He's quite, I was gonna say adorable, but that's not quite the right word. There's something about him that's very likable. He, I think he inhabits this kind of devil may care kind of, a little bit arrogant character really well. And yeah, there's a couple of self-portraits of Rembrandt that I think may have been Laughton's like direct inspiration for his performance. They're like almost alike, even though Rembrandt and Laughton have quite different, facial features and stuff like that. So yeah, it seems kind of an odd choice to me, as a plot, to not focus on his life with Saskia, because it's such a kind of such a big romance. They were so crazy about each other and such an interesting couple. But they went with the second half of his life. And I mean, it's fine. It's a very entertaining film. I liked the way Elsa Lanchester playing his housekeeper turned sort of lover and I think de facto wife. She's very resilient. She's very tough, and she's very, um, Elsa has a lot of fun playing her. I think this kind of um, woman that has to boss around this sort of man with his head in the clouds, who's not going to earn a wage and sort of do the traditional husband bit with her. And yeah, she's very interesting to watch. So yeah, the film itself, it's, to me, I was like really surprised by how much I liked the visuals of this film. It's very painterly. The sets, especially towards the start, the sets are really like bright and fresh and open spaces. There's like kind of staircases and high ceilings and Dutch doors and tapestries, and it's very I wouldn't say it's theatrical. It has a sense of theater to it, but it has a realism that is very not much a film thing, very much what you would expect in a film. I really, really liked the way it looked. I felt like they were trying to get a sense of time, but stylize it a little bit. And the visuals change over the course of the film as well, to go from being very clean and fresh to slowly, as he kind of has less and less money, the film almost gets like a dusty look. Not the film stock, but like the chairs and the clothes and everything. It sort of slowly gets sort of more stale and less fresh, and more dusty and less clean and clear. And yeah, it is a film about a painter, and they kind of do a few things that some of the backgrounds kind of hint at backgrounds of his paintings or of paintings at the time, to create a sense of sort of place and stuff like that, which I thought was really nice. I think some people felt like maybe some people have called this film stilted for that reason, and I don't think it is. I think it's intentional. It's a choice to kind of have this kind of, he painted people, and paintings are still, paintings are static. Rembrandt's paintings are not particularly full of motion. I don't know. You can argue me on that one if you want. There's a couple of shots where the face is sort of in frame, and it's kind of framed by a picture frame behind, or framed by things in the frame behind the sort of portrait. I'm explaining this really badly. In a tight shot, sometimes the face will kind of be framed by the background in a way that kind of hints at painting and portraiture, which I think is kind of, it's like done in a really nice way. It's not like overdone. There is a moment where he realizes that Saskia is dead at the start of the film, and his face is very startled and very shocked, and his life's kind of like in that moment falling apart, and it's almost cartoonish because there's sort of lines behind his head from the backdrop that they've chosen that kind of like almost like show his emotion kind of pushing out, it's kind of yeah. And all the images are very composed. So there's another sort of scene later on where a big massive painting, almost like a mural sized painting, is unveiled, and we can kind of see the painting a little bit, but we're looking through a room full of people, and it's composed very much like the painting is, or like paintings of that era are. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting lighting choices as well. As I was saying before, they use a lot of light at the start, and light is obviously very important to painters, and part of the composition of a painting. But as he kind of sinks into himself and just sort of can't seem to get out of his own way, everything starts to go darker, and there's a lot more gray, a lot more sort of tonal things happening, and the ceilings are lower, so it's kind of a sense of, something kind of hanging over you, or it creates a kind of almost like a claustrophobia or a lowering kind of a thing. So yeah, the plot's kind of follows him as he kind of I'm saying kind of all the time, and the plot follows him as he sort of sinks down, and his new partner is trying to pull him up, and I feel really bad for her. It must have been so difficult for people at that time. If you're attached to somebody, you just sink with them, not a lot of options for people back in the day. But yeah, I think plot-wise, it's very even. It's I hadn't really heard of this film before, and a friend recommended it to me, and I wasn't sure what to expect, and I felt like the visuals really kind of blew me away because they're so different to other things of the same era. So it felt quite original, a little bit startling, which I liked. Had a very like painterly, creative feel, which I thought was really good. And there's like, I think everyone in this film's pretty good, but the two leads are really, really good. And so I kind of really enjoyed this much more than I expected to, and I didn't want anything bad to happen to him, and yet he can't get out of his own way, and he's just kind of like being arrogant and annoying his patrons and offending people. And yeah, I really enjoyed that kind of plot of the film. It's very, I don't know, it's good. So he and Elsa Lanchester, as I mentioned, were married. So the interesting thing about that, there was a thing back in the Hollywood sort of system. Obviously this was a British film, but it was still, a thing. You couldn't publicly be a gay person, or I suppose you could maybe get away with it, but it wasn't, people sort of wanted to hide it. And so there was a thing called a lavender marriage. Sometimes in Hollywood, these were actually arranged by studios to cover up that someone was gay. So they would marry off sort of a gay man and a lesbian actress, and kind of be like, oh, see, they're not gay because they're married, so everything's fine here, And yeah, and it was just kind of a way to cover that up and pretend like that wasn't a thing, which is obviously quite destructive, and hopefully people don't have to do that anymore. But Charles Laughton was gay, and his wife, Elsa Lanchester, later wrote, she accepted that he was gay, like didn't bother her, and I think they were very, close and cared about each other a lot. But in her biography, so there's a little scandal that I don't know if it will interest anyone, but it always interests me. Elsa Lanchester wrote this biography, and it was after his death, and she said in the biography that they never had kids because he was gay, and so they weren't, sleeping together. But another actress came out and said that's not exactly the case. They couldn't have kids because back when Elsa worked in vaudeville, she'd had some kind of illegal abortions that had left her unable to have children. And so there's this kind of scandal of like, sort of finger pointing about why they never had children. Which really, I mean, maybe they just didn't want to have children. I don't know. But Elsa Lanchester obviously felt like she needed to come out with that story in her biography. And she probably never would have done it if he was alive. But she did know about his affairs with men and stuff like that, and that wasn't really a problem for her. It wasn't like she was misled or anything. So that's the two of them. Charles Laughton, as I mentioned, he was in the previous film that I covered on here. He also directed just one film, and I did cover it. It's Night of the Hunter, with Robert Mitchum and Shelley Winters. So I think Night of the Hunter is such a good film. It feels so like different to anything else. It came out in 1955, and there's the main character is a preacher. He says he's a preacher, but he's actually after money, and like there's some horrible things can happen in this film, and it feels very different to other things that were being made in 1955. But it was the only thing that Charles Laughton would direct. It didn't do super well, and because of that, he was never asked to direct anything else. But I always kind of wonder with him what else he could have done as a director. He's a good actor. I like him quite a lot. I think I enjoy it. He seems to really love chewing up the scenery and just kind of inhabiting these big, larger than life characters. And I think he does it really well. And he and Elsa Lanchester on screen are a really good team as well. They have a kind of chemistry with each other. And and I think in this film, in Rembrandt, they're having a really good time. So it would have been interesting to see what else he might have done. Because I feel like Night of the Hunter shows maybe a different side of Charles Laughton, a kind of darker, grittier side of himself, perhaps. I think this is one of those films where after watching it, I kind of felt like I wanted to know a little bit more about Rembrandt's previous life, sort of his life with Saskia. But I felt like the amount of detail and thought that went into the sets and costuming and the kind of the composing of each shot that had a kind of painterly aspect to it was just really, I don't know, just kind of really, I liked it. It felt quite fresh, even, all this time later watching it. So I really recommend this one. It's different and has two really solid performances from those two leads. And I feel like it's quite respectful and makes you kind of like Rembrandt. I mean, he's not just somebody that feels sorry for himself and takes to drink, and he's not just another kind of artist, in an artist movie where, oh, they're so misunderstood and whatever. I feel like he is quite understandable, and he is sort of, sometimes you're like, he's just being immature, he's just being arrogant, like he's probably been pandered to too much and gotten away with too much, and now he can't get away with it anymore. And I felt like that feels a little bit original. I do recommend this one, and that's about it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for coming along on this little journey into 1936's Rembrandt.